Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to a new video on the channel. No gameplay in this one. Instead, we're going to reveal my list for 2024 for the Tac Up Wargaming 10-game challenge. As for the rules for this year's list, it's a pretty standard choose your 10 games, post the list somewhere. We're going to be making this video and then posting it to the Tac Up Wargaming group. As far as the deadlines are concerned, obviously it's also play the games and post the pictures. We have to play at least 2 games before the end of April and 4 by the end of July. List needs to be finished by January 27th of next year. And then you get bonus entries if you play one of your games in the month that historically occurred, and a bonus game award if you play at least one game each month in 2024, and a bonus award if you play a game that you played in a previous challenge. So those are the rules for 2024. My last year's introduction to wargaming was my list from last year, and I wanted to keep it somewhat small, but even that ended up being a little bit bigger than I expected. I was mostly impressed by the games on the list last year, but there were a few that I really didn't like. Out of last year's list, there are only 2 games I'm repeating on this year's list. Let's start revealing this list with those 2 repeats. One of the 2 repeats from last year's list on this year's list will be one of our staples of Space Month. Once again, we'll be up against the Doomsday Machines as we play Space Empire's 4X from GMT Games will once again be on my list. I may toss in an expansion with this one this year, but we'll have to see about that. I really enjoyed this game when I got it out last year. It's mostly an operational level game, but there's definitely enough tactical action here to scratch that tactical itch, because there's a strategy of, okay, when do you actually go after the Doomsday Machines? You're obviously building up your fleet so you can eventually survive the battle with the Doomsday Machines, but you've got to really pick your moment to go after the Doomsday Machines. Otherwise, you're going to get blown to pieces and potentially lose the game, especially depending on how far forward your colonies end up being against those Doomsday Machines. But that's enough rambling on that for me. With that, let's move to the other repeat on this year's list. We had a bit of list drama last year, and as such, we had to swap one of the games off the list last year. I'm hoping that won't be a problem again this year, but we'll have the replacement game from that swap last year on this year's list. We're going to head back up in the Phoenix's Fury as we play Target for Today from Legion Wargames. We had a couple of recalls on when we sent the Phoenix's Fury up during Advent of the Phoenix last month. I'm hoping we won't have as many recalls when we get this game out to the channel this year. As for the rest of the list, half of the games won't be new to the channel, but they'll be new to the list. The other half are both new to the channel and the list. Let's move to new to list but not channel next. For the number of times we played this game on the channel last year, this was almost an honorary 11th game on the list. In fact, the only reason it wasn't on last year's list was because I didn't acquire it until early last year. In a move that will probably surprise no one, fresh off of his promotion, Zimmer will be heading back out on patrols as the Hunters makes an appearance on this year's list. We'll also need to be more careful as the Allies are getting a hold on the U-boats. One thing I really discovered last year is that I enjoy the heavy narrative-focused games. I really enjoy watching the story unfold. And I think that was one of the things I was nervous about, especially at the operational level, with like your Absolute Wars or your Hitler's Reichs, where the story to me seemed to be largely predefined for you. So you never really got that feeling of, okay, now I'm writing my own story for the game, where the story felt largely predefined in those operational level games. And that I really didn't like. So that's why so many of last year's games ended up being off the list for this year. But with that, let's continue with the part of the list that's new to the list, but not the channel. This one isn't a traditional war game, but I'm including it due to the setting and the theme, plus its inextricable link to World War II. Black Orchestra centers around a plot to assassinate Hitler during World War II, and this one will be on my list for this year. I'm including it as a war game, again, because of the setting in this game, where you're behind the lines trying to assassinate Hitler with the Gestapo harassing you at every turn. I've really enjoyed this game as I've played it in the past, and in terms of how well the theme comes out, I'd stack this game against a lot of my other favorites. I typically play this game around Victory in Europe Day, and this year will be no exception, as we'll be playing this one in May. The next game on this list, however, is going to take us to a very different setting. In keeping with my enjoyment of narrative-focused games, Gregory M. Smith will be bringing another game to our list, as we will be having America Bomber, Evil Queen of the Skies from Compass Games on the list. In this one, we're set in an alternate timeline of World War II, where the Germans have won the war in Europe and now are turning their attention to the United States. They have a forward base in the Azores after putting heavy pressure on Portugal to let them use it. And Germany is using their America bombers to target the United States mainland. So we'll be continuing our background playthrough that we started of America Bomber, Evil Queen of the Skies, on this year's list. One more game that's new to the list but not the channel, so let's move into that now, along with the first new to both game. When I had book games on last year's list, I was just starting to get into war games, and as you're probably seeing, this year's list is very different from last year's. I took what I learned from last year's list and incorporated it into this year's, mostly in what I enjoy in wargaming. My main hesitation with book games, coming back to that in particular, ended up being that if you play through the game, like it, and want to play it again, you'd have to buy another copy of it. It's a little better if you buy the game off Wargame Vault in PDF form or some other way to get PDFs, but it is still something to be aware of. With these two games, however, that's not the case. You're not writing in the book itself. Instead, you're writing everything down in a separate logbook, usually a notebook, although for Mag-23 Guadalcanal, which along with its older brother Tally-Ho from Historic Wings will be on the list, you'll be writing everything in a separate notebook. So in Mag-23 Guadalcanal, we're dumped into the battle in the Pacific against the Japanese, where in our background playthrough so far, our biggest adversary seems to be Henderson Field. That's causing a lot of problems with our planes. As for Tally-Ho, we get dumped into the Battle of Britain, similarly building up the narrative of our experiences. Hopefully we'll have a great story from that game as well. Our next game takes us back to the seas of World War II. Last year's list had a field commander on it. This year's is going to feature a fleet commander. I had Field Commander Rommel on my list last year, but I soured on it after playing through 2 of the 3 scenarios and discovering that the third also had losing pre-written into the scenario. However, Fleet Commander Nimitz, which will be debuting both on the channel and the list, focuses on the years of the war rather than the particular scenarios in the role of Admiral Chester Nimitz in charge of the Pacific Fleet. I did enjoy Field Commander Rommel, but again, the heavy scenario focus there and being very on rails kind of made me sour on that one, to where Field Commander Rommel ended up leaving my collection. I don't think Fleet Commander Nimitz will be the same thing, but we'll see how that goes. It's definitely a much bigger game. I got it out a couple times last year, and I had to really lean on Stuka Joe's video to make sense of this one, but I think I'll be able to get a hold of it this year. So, staying with the Pacific, let's move to our next game. We featured Warfighter on the channel before, and will again Sunday with the modern daytime version, but for this list, we're going to move into the Pacific version. In Warfighter, we have control of a squad of soldiers trying to complete a mission, and sometimes get an extraction as well. My experience with Warfighter has been interesting. My first Warfighter game was Shadow War, but for learning, I felt like the stealth aspect made it a bridge too far. So I decided to pick up some more Smash Mouth settings to see if I did like the system with Warfighter Shadow War, so I picked up some more Smash Mouth settings for learning purposes with the plan of eventually going back to Shadow War after I got more experience on the game. I did end up enjoying the Warfighter system, so I went back to Shadow War, but I still didn't like it. I still thought the stealth aspect was a bridge too far. So that one's going to be getting ready to leave my collection at some point as well. Now, I do have a particular reason for that I'm going into the Pacific, but I won't spoil that until I'm ready to put that on the channel. And anybody who knows some of the regular content on the channel can probably guess what I've got in mind by going to the Pacific. But I'll get into that when we get closer to it. But let's move into the last game on the list. We're going to move back to the land forces for the last game on the list. Late last year, I was trying to decide which of my tank games to keep. It was either going to be, well, I've got a few other ones in there, the tank on tank games, but the main two I was looking at were between Tiger Leader and American Tank Ace from Compass Games. Knowing what I like about, especially in the wargaming world, I knew either this one or American Tank Ace should have been a hit. After giving each one of them a thorough playthrough, Tiger Leader stayed in the collection and will be on this year's list. I wasn't going to get spoilerific on my plan with this one, but I'm going to. So when I was looking at content scheduling, I noticed that the 1st of September actually fell on a Sunday. For those of you history buffs, you may remember that back in 1939, World War II actually started when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. And there's the Poland campaign. The Poland campaign is one of the campaigns in Tiger Leader. So that's the campaign we're going to be doing on the 1st of September to commemorate the start of World War II. So that's all 10 games. Now let's move back up top to wrap this video up. It's a very narrative-heavy list, but narrative-heavy games are what I prefer in the wargaming world. I've kind of shied away from hex and counter games, but a lot of that is part of that's because I haven't really looked too much into hex and counter games, and I think another part of it, actually there's 3 parts I think to it. The first is that I haven't really looked too much into it. I do have something of a list I've looked into, but none of those have really caught my eye. The second is a lot of them look very intimidating to me, especially as I'm still somewhat learning the wargaming world. And the third seems to be that a lot of them just aren't solo friendly, whether it's because they work better with 2 players, there's a lot of hidden information, or just whatever it is. I just have kind of shied away from hex and counter games. But I do have a list of those to look into. For now, though, my list is all set. We still have a busy weekend coming up on the channel. Actually, a busy week. Tomorrow we'll be making the last recipe out of the Cooking with Deadpool cookbook on Mystical Munchies with the dessert chimney. Sunday we're heading back to the Warfighter world for Warfighter Modern Daytime. Tuesday, and there's a night you don't hear a lot on the channel, we'll be playing Twilight Inscription, and that normally would be a Wednesday upload. But Wednesday will feature the end of January recap. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care everyone.